So I will call to order the Board of Commissioners on March 31st, 2021 at 7:05 p.m. The first item on the agenda is adjustments to the agenda. Does anyone have anything they'd like to make in the way of adjustments? Hearing none, I'll move on to the second. I'd like to welcome all. We have more visitors than usual in this call. I first will go through a roll call to make sure that we know who is participating from the Board of Commissioners. Then we will have, in the spirit of trying to get to know one another a bit better as we've working remotely, we'll have three people who will give us a brief introduction of themselves, Laz Skangas, Bill Irwin, and Coy Boynton. And then I have a few opening remarks. So first, to go through a roll call. Is Egan Murphy on?
He had a conflict.
Okay. From Alberg Town, is Alton on? Russo.
Yes.
Welcome, Alton. Is Terry Tatro on from Alberg Town and Alberg Village? Bill Irwin from Bakersfield?
Yes, I'm on. Thank you.
Hi, Bill.
Hey, Kurt.
Vincent Hickey from Berkshire?
He's traveling.
Claude Sharon from Berkshire? Leonard Sharon from Enosburg Falls? Sean Kyle from Enosburg Falls and Enosburg Town?
Here.
Pauline Steen from Fairfax?
Here.
You're not still up in lot one?
Oh, my goodness.
Brad, Brad Dochev from Fairfax? Alicia LaRock from Fairfield? Brian Doobie from Fairfield?
Yeah, I'm here, Kurt.
Welcome. Lynn Douglas from Fletcher?
Here.
Lori Rupel from Fletcher? Yvonne Danderon from Franklin?
Here.
Wesley Kempton from Franklin?
Here.
Scott St. Ange from Georgia? Kirk Waite from Georgia is here. Barclay Morris from Grand Isle.
Yep, I'm here.
Howard DeMars from Grand Isle. Richard Noel from Highgate.
Here.
Sylvia Jensen from Isle Lamont. Claude Hancock from Montgomery. Andy Alling from North Hero.
Here.
Rowena Brown from Richford.
Here.
Jeff Kane from Sheldon. Joe Farnham from South Hero.
Joe sends his regrets. He had a last minute conflict pop up.
Thank you. And now I know Bob Berman from South Hero is here.
I am here.
Marty Manahan from St. Albans City. Laz Skangas from St. Albans City.
I'm here.
Sarah Had from St. Albans Town.
I'm here.
Albin Vogel from St. Albans Town.
He had a conflict.
Thank you. Harold Garrett from Swanton Town. Ross Lavoie from Swanton Town. Elizabeth Nance from Swanton Village.
I am here.
And Neil Spear from Swanton Village.
I am here.
Hey, Neil. And is there anyone that I missed? Fantastic. So Laz, would you take a moment or two and introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Laz Skangus. I represent St. Albans City. I grew up in St. Albans. We moved here from Massachusetts when I was 7. I've been here ever since. Went to school to become an architect and came back here and practiced with a firm for about 6 years. And since about 94, I've had my own firm. We were in Chester. And then about 6 years ago, we moved to St. Albans, and it's been nice because I didn't like the commute. I've served on a number of boards at St. Albans City, Development Review Board, Planning Commission. Currently, I'm serving on the Historic Planning Commission. And we just became a certified local government. And I've been sitting on this board, Catherine, I think for the longest of any other boards that I've sat on.
Great.
So maybe it's time to go away.
No.
Only if you find a suitable replacement.
Oh, geez, okay. Okay, that's about it.
Thank you, Laz.
Yep.
Also, Bill Irwin has agreed to give us a brief introduction from Highgate.
Bakersfield.
Bakersfield, sorry about that.
Okay, we're just a little further south. So I've been here in New England for 30 years, 15 in New Hampshire, 15 in Vermont. And I worked at Harvard and MIT before I came here, commuting out of New Hampshire to go there. The career started back with nuclear submarines and carriers many years ago, and I ended up with commercial nuclear reactors in New Hampshire. I came here to Vermont where I manage the radiation control program and am a crew chief for the state hazmat team. I'm also a volunteer firefighter and emergency medical technician here in Bakersfield. I have been working over the last 15 years now to become a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear emergency response specialist, and have done so, and I work nationally and internationally with various agencies as a consultant to them. I've been working the last 13 months as a biological expert for the COVID-19 response for the Vermont Department of Health, who has employed me for the last 15 years. We've got a hobby farm in Bakersfield. I teach skiing at Smuggler's Notch, and I am very glad to have been part of the NRPC for about 10 years now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And Coy Boynton, I hope I didn't slay that too bad, who is on our staff.
That was pretty close, thanks. So I'm Coy Boynton. I grew up in southern New Hampshire and moved to Vermont when I was 12. I have lived in 50% of the towns in Chittenden County, including the past 18 years in Westford, where I serve on the Planning Commission and live with my husband and my daughter, who's a freshman in high school at Essex High School. I started my professional career in television for about 10-15 years. I worked in news production, and I was a local television producer. So traveled all over Vermont, working at Channel 3, filming at small businesses, and fell in love with our rural economy and our rural communities, and moved on to the State of the Vermont Agency of Agriculture for about 8 years. Loved working there, building our farm to school program, doing some dairy marketing and ag and culinary tourism there. It was a wonderful experience. And I've been in Franklin County working for the past, I think it's 8 years now, with Healthy Roots for half of that, although working with the team that built Healthy Roots for a long time. I truly believe we can build community with food and bring people together. And hobbies, I'm a horrible gardener. And I love everything fiber, from knitting to weaving to spinning.
Thank you very much. For those of you who are not members of the Board of Commissioners, I'm going to ask that the person taking our minutes this evening capture your participation through the meeting document, through knowing who has signed on. But if you have a specific question or comment during the meeting, please give your name so that we can capture it accurately in the minutes. For those of you who aren't aware, March 16th marked 1 year of our staff working remotely. We shut our office down and everyone moved remote on March 16th in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been an odd year for all of us. I want to recognize Catherine and the entire staff for working together to push the goals of the Northwest Regional Planning Commission forward in spite of all of the challenges that we faced and that were faced. I'm proud of this team and I want to thank all of you. I also want to thank the Board of Commissioners for the flexibility that you've showed. My hope is that things will become more normal as Vermont returns to the new normal. I'm hopeful that we will be able to return to in-person meetings sometime this summer. I am also hopeful that we will be able to continue with some of the things adopted during this pandemic that actually made us a bit more effective as again, we define what is the new normal. So thanks to all of you, and a special thanks to the professional team that we have here at the Northwest Regional Planning Commission. Opportunity for public comment. Does anyone have anything they'd like to highlight during that agenda item? Hearing none. Minutes of January 2021 meeting. They are enclosed. Any errors, omissions?
None noted. I'll make a motion to pass the minutes as recorded, as printed.
Got a motion. Do I have a second?
Bill Irwin will second.
Thank you, Bill. All in favor? Pardon me, any comments? All in favor signify with an aye.
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 Opposed, nay. And abstentions. Motion carries. Thank you. Tonight we have Art Woolf with us from Art Woolf Consulting. He is going to give a presentation on the Northwest Vermont economic study. And I suspect that that is what many of our visitors are here to listen to, and not my voice drone on. So Art, thank you for joining us. And I hope that you and Catherine or you or someone else have worked out the logistics of how you'll show any slides you have and that type of thing. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill, or Kirk rather. Thank you everyone for showing up. I'll give you a little background before I go to the slides, just so you can understand kind of what's going on. So about a year, well, almost a year and a half ago, probably fall of 2019, Frank Coffey at GBIC asked me to start a project to look at the Northwestern Vermont regional economy. Most analyses usually focus on the county level, but his view was that the Northwestern Vermont is really can be seen better as a region. And he wanted to put together some numbers so people could see the importance of the Northwest region on the state economy. So I put together a report and analysis for him in about December or January of, December 2019, January 2020. And just as Frank and GBIC were about to release it, or at least kind of shop it around like we're doing right now, the COVID hit, and Frank said, there's no way this is gonna see the light of day. Everybody's kind of preoccupied with other stuff. So we didn't do anything with it. And then he came back to me well, roughly a year later, so toward the end of last year, and said, I think we're ready to redo it. Can you update it and make it more current? Obviously, a year had passed, so there was a year's worth of more data. Update it. And the more we talked, the more we realized that we thought that it would be very useful to add to it some discussion of how Northwestern Vermont has fared in the recession and the COVID recession, which is what I call it, and both the recession itself and the recovery that we're now in. So that's what I did. I finished it a few months ago, and we've been talking to a few groups like this about it, and it's going to be released shortly. Sorry about that confusion at the very beginning about the public nature of this. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. I have a PowerPoint with, I don't know, maybe 15 slides or something. So I will go through that. And then hopefully there'll be plenty of time afterwards for you to ask questions. I think with the large number of people in the group, it's probably easier to do the questions at the end rather than through the middle. So the analysis, I am, those of you who don't know, I'm an economist. I taught for almost 40 years at UVM. I spent 3 years working for Madeline Kunin as her economist in the late 1980s. I had a consulting firm with a partner, and when he retired, we sort of dissolved that company, but we published something called the Vermont Economy Newsletter for about 25 years, which was a monthly newsletter on the state economy. And so that's basically my background. And so I'm an economist, so this is basically an economic report. With lots of numbers, but hopefully they will be understandable and put things in a perspective. So I'm not going to go through all these numbers right now. This is kind of part of the executive summary. The only number I want you to look at from this is the population number. Northwest Vermont, which we're defining it for these purposes as the counties of Franklin, Grand Isle, and Chittenden. We're kind of limited in terms of regional analysis to county level of disaggregation, even though you might think Northwestern Vermont, well, maybe not all of Franklin County is really part of it. And maybe Northwestern Vermont as a region should include parts of Northern Addison County and maybe part of Lamoille County. But we're limited. And so we are, our definition of Northwest Vermont, whenever I use that term, it is Franklin, Grand Isle, and Chittenden counties. They have a total of 220,000 people, which is, and here's the relevant number to remember, it's 35% of the state's population. State has about 625,000 people. So 35% is kind of the benchmark that I'm going to be comparing lots of other numbers to. So the we all know the state of Vermont's population is both aging and stagnant. And so over the last 20 years, we don't only have numbers, population numbers through 2019. And obviously in the we have 2000 was a census year, 2010 was census year, 2020. The 2020 census numbers are not going to be released for a while. They've been delayed. Usually we would have gotten them by now, but all we have are census estimates for the year 2019. I've been looking at population numbers for 30 years, and the census number is going to be pretty close to the 2019 estimate. So over the last 20 years, looking at a very longer period of time, 2 decades, Vermont's population has only increased by 2.5%, 14,000 people. Those 3 counties of Northwestern Vermont have increased by 20,000 to almost 21,000 people. So that more than accounts for the entire population increase. Northwestern Vermont's increase was 10.5%. So over that time period, the rest of Vermont lost 1.6% of its population. And I just noticed I forgot to put a negative sign before the 6,400. So the rest of Vermont's lost about 6,500 people. You'll notice also that the US population has grown much faster than either Vermont or even Northwestern Vermont. So even in the region of the state, which I'll be talking about later, has experienced the most rapid growth in general, economic growth, but also the most rapid population growth. We still up here in Northwestern Vermont are growing significantly slower than the national average for the last 20 years. And those numbers are even worse if you look at the last 10 years. In the last 10 years, the numbers for Vermont are basically our population is stagnated. The population in the 2020 census, when it comes out, will basically show that between 2010 and 2020, Vermont's population was essentially unchanged, maybe up 1,000 or two, maybe down 1,000 or two, but that's pretty much stagnant. And that is very dramatically different than in the past, especially in the last 4 decades of the 20th century. Very dramatic change. So up here, these 3 counties are really the only growth spots in the state as a whole. I won't go through different counties, but the 4 southern counties of Vermont, for example, have lost population over the last 20 years significantly. Very different than here. And this just shows the pattern. Basically Northwestern Vermont, pretty much every year for this century has been growing faster than the state as a whole. And the rest of Vermont for just about every year has been growing more slowly than the state as a whole. And all 3 of those lines are kind of trending downwards. So the population growth rate is going down and down and down. And you can see in Vermont for the last 10 years, it's hovering around 0. So that's the population number. Again, the relevant thing to remember is 35% of the state's population lives here. So that's the background. What about jobs? In terms of jobs, Northwestern Vermont has 39% of the state's jobs. So we have more jobs percentage-wise than our population. Remember, 39% versus 35%. Now, the rest of Vermont has more jobs in total, 60%. But if we look at the growth in jobs, again, looking over a long period of time, 2 decades, Northwestern Vermont has added to its job base at almost a 10%. That's not 10% per year, that's 10% over 10 years. About twice as fast as the state as a whole, and just about 5 times as fast as the rest of Vermont. And even though we are only 39% of all the jobs up here, it's 3/4 of all the job growth in the state has occurred in these 3 counties. Okay. Now these numbers are through 2019. We don't have the 2020 numbers yet. That allows me to do this analysis, and obviously the COVID recession is going to make things different, but not materially different. So basically, with 39% of the jobs, more than our population proportionate share, we are responsible for 3/4 of all the new jobs in Vermont that have been generated over the last 20 years. Okay. And how do you have more jobs than percentage-wise than people? 39% of the jobs, only 35% of the people. And the obvious answer is people commute into Northwestern Vermont from other counties. So on net, people obviously also commute outside of the region. People in St. Albans and Burlington, they work in Montpelier or Middlebury or all sorts of other places. But on net, there's about 4,000 more people 4,000 more people commuting into Northwest Vermont for jobs than leave for jobs elsewhere. And there's also a net positive, a much smaller number, but of interstate job commuting patterns. So people work in Vermont and live in New York primarily, and they commute into here. And there's some people who live in Northwest Vermont and commute outside of the state, or outside of the region and outside of the state. So on net, Northwestern Vermont attracts people to work, and that's how we get a higher share of jobs than our population per share would suggest. And why do people commute into the region? And the answer is because wages are higher. So in that first column, the total wages, Northwestern Vermont accounts for 44% of all the wages paid by employers in the state. So 35% of the population, about 39% of the jobs, and 44% of the wages. And obviously, the reason we have such a high proportion of the total wages is, number one, people are commuting in, but number two, the employers here pay significantly more on average than they do elsewhere in the state. So the statewide average wage, and this is a very crude number, it's just looking at the total wage bill in the state of Vermont, all $15 billion, and dividing it by the total number of jobs in the state. And you get about $50,000. In Northwestern Vermont, it's $55,000. So in Northwest Vermont, jobs here pay on average about 12% more than the statewide average. And if you compare jobs in Northwest Vermont to the jobs outside of Northwest Vermont, that is, the state minus the Northwest region, then it's 20% higher. So that's a pretty big differential in wages. So no wonder people commute here, the jobs are better. And so high wages are a source of why people move here. And it's just a fact that Northwest Vermont is an economic engine in that regard, with a lot of jobs and a lot of high-paying jobs compared to the state averages. Another way to measure income is something that the U.S. government publishes called personal income. And basically, it's just a much broader measure of income than just looking at wages. It does include wages, but it also includes interest and dividends and government transfer payments like Social Security and unemployment and things like that. And rather than focusing on the percent again is higher than the 35%. To me, the interesting thing here is that for the last decade, the share of total income earned by residents of these three counties has been increasing. Maybe not a lot, from about 36% to almost 38%, a little bit less than that. But there's clearly an upward trend over the last decade in terms of this broader measure of income. I think that's important as well. Now, there's one of the reasons Frank asked me to do this report is because he thought there was a lot of discussion around the state and in Montpelier that Northwest Vermont was getting more than its fair share of attention from the state. So one of the things I looked at was where tax revenues come from a geographic standpoint. And we can only do this with a certain number of taxes, not all of them, but fortunately some of them are pretty big ones. So for example, if you look at the first row, personal income, it's the largest general fund revenue source in Vermont, $818 million in calendar year 2018. The latest data the tax department has. And that's 42% of all the personal income taxes the state gets. So again, a much higher share of personal income taxes comes to Montpelier from these three counties than our population share would warrant. It's close to what our wages are in terms of shares. We are an economic engine, and we pay more than a proportionate share, or more than you might think, of personal income taxes. Some of these numbers, by the way, you might think, well, there's kind of two sets of numbers the way your perception might be. One is, yeah, I kind of knew that. It doesn't really surprise me. And hopefully for some of these other numbers and percents that I'm going to be talking about or have talked about, your reaction hopefully will be, oh, that's interesting. I never realized that. So I'm not sure where personal income taxes come in on that one, but what about sales and use taxes? So the state in calendar year 19 got $422 million worth of sales and use tax revenues. And how much of that came from northwestern Vermont? That's kind of it's a hard question because for a number of reasons. Number one is this is now personal income taxes. That's where people live. You live in Franklin County and you pay your taxes to Montpelier, and the state of Vermont knows that those taxes, those income taxes, came from someone living in Franklin County. Sales and use taxes is different. The location of the payer of the sales and use tax really isn't known. All we know is where the store or the establishment was located that paid those taxes. So I live in Westford. I live about a quarter of a mile from Franklin County. And when I go to my local hardware store in Fairfax and I buy something and I pay tax on it, that shows up as sales taxes coming from Franklin County, even though I live in Chittenden County. Okay, well, fair enough. That's an issue. But there's some even more difficult or more problematic issues with the sales and use tax. The first one is, of course, a lot of what people buy and pay sales taxes on comes from out of state. You buy something from Amazon, you buy something from LL Bean online, all sorts of things. And so that's included in the $422 million of sales taxes, but it's not from any county in Vermont. The second problem is that there are many retail establishments in the state that have more than one location. There's an Ace Hardware store in St. Albans. There's also an Ace Hardware store in Essex. There's a bunch of Ace Hardware stores. There's a bunch of Aubuchon hardware stores. And certainly, I'm not sure about the ownership of all the Ace Hardware stores in Vermont, if they're owned by the same person and the same company. But I certainly know that all the Aubuchon hardware stores are owned by the same company. And when they pay the sales taxes to the state of Vermont, they just write one check and say, and it says, this is how much we owe the state from all the sales that were taxable in Vermont during the month of February. So we can't attribute that to any county. And if you notice, quite a bit of the sales taxes cannot be attributed to any county. So the total sales taxes is 422 million. But if we only look at sales where we know where the store was, there's only well, not only, still a lot, but 284 million. So that's a quite significant difference. Basically 1/3 of all the sales taxes that the state collects, we cannot identify a county where that occurred, whether it was out of state or just multi-locations. So this is kind of a math question. So if you take the Franklin, Chittenden, and Grand Isle sales taxes reported by stores in those three counties, and you divide it by 422 million, you get 29%, which is smaller than our 35% population share. It's smaller than on the other percentages I've been talking about. But if you exclude all the sales taxes where we don't know where the stores were, then it's 43%. That's a lot more. So what percent of the sales taxes in Vermont that the state of Vermont gets comes from Northwest Vermont? Well, I'd say 43% is probably a closer approximation than 29%. And you get the same thing with meals and rooms taxes. Restaurants with multi-locations, McDonald's would be one, but all sorts of other ones. You get the same issue. If you look at all the meals and rooms taxes collected, it's 33% comes from Northwestern Vermont. If you exclude by other, I just mean we don't know where the location was. We only use the counties where we know where they were, then it's 36%, which is about our population share. So When we start talking about meals and rooms taxes, we're starting to get into the issue of Vermont's large tourism sector, which you would expect to generate lots of meals and rooms taxes because they're almost all of the ski areas, for example, a large part of Vermont's vacation tourism sector is skiing, and the only ski area in northwestern Vermont is Bolton. The other tax I looked at was property transfer tax, not a big tax, but it's just the tax you pay when a property is transferred. It's a little bit higher than, or somewhat higher than the population share. So if you look at all of the taxes and you exclude those locations where we don't know where the transaction occurred for meals and rooms and sales, then you get that northwestern Vermont is responsible for 42% of all personal income, sales and use, meals and rooms, and property transfer taxes in the state. And those are big taxes, not the property transfer, but the other two are big. So that's the northwestern Vermont counties are a very large source of revenue for the state of Vermont. The other tax I looked at was property taxes. I am only looking though at education property taxes. Why? Well, because any town in Vermont that levies municipal taxes, and obviously they all do, that's revenues that are raised locally and stay locally. So there's really no kind of regional, somebody's getting too much or paying too much or not getting enough issue involved with that. But with education, it's different because especially since Act 60 was passed in 1997, you can think of Vermont's property tax financing system, which is extremely complicated, as basically a system that collects property taxes for education uses statewide, sends them all to Montpelier, and then funnels them back to local school districts based on a certain formula. Because it's not the case that property taxes stay in the town where they are generated. So if we look at the education property taxes that we all pay, divide it into two components. First one, residential, the second one, non-residential. So look at residential first. So the residential property tax, which is the tax on people's homes that live here, 39% of all tax revenues come from northwestern Vermont. So higher than our population share, and pretty obvious reason is housing is more expensive up here than it is elsewhere in the state. And that probably accounts for most of the reason for why that's so high. If we look at non-residential education property taxes, those are taxes on commercial property, industrial property, and vacation home property. And of course, when you start thinking about vacation home property, you don't really think too much about somebody's camp on Lake Carmi or on the shore of South Hero, even though they are there. You tend to think of the large ski developments at Stowe and Stratton Mountain and Killington and places like that. There's a lot of value in those properties. And so Northwest Vermont only accounts for 29% of all the non-residential education property taxes. And that's despite all the commercial and industrial and office buildings and everything else up here. That still doesn't compensate for the large amount of vacation home property outside of northwestern Vermont. So that's a lot lower than our population share. If you put those two together, you get 33.5% of all the property taxes used for education come from northwestern Vermont, a little bit less than our population share. Not a huge amount, but it is still less. And the education property taxes, you might note, $1.3 billion. That's as much as the personal income tax and the sales tax combined. It's actually a little bit more than those two combined. So this is a lot of money we're talking about. So what about spending? So one question that I tried to answer is, how does state spending vary by region? Does Northwestern Vermont get more money from the state for all sorts of things? And the answer to that is we don't know. I could not find from human resources, I'm sorry, not human resources, I'm drawing a blank.
Services.
Human services, thank you. I'm not sure why I'm thinking of human resources. Human services, they can't provide a breakdown by region of where the money's going. Agency of Transportation couldn't do it. So the state's measuring systems are just not set up to do that. The only one we can get a really good picture of is education spending, because we know where the money goes. And so if you look at the number of equalized students, which is what the state's education formula is based on, it's not quite the same thing as students, but it's close enough. Our share of students is just about dead even with our share of population, 35%. And our share of education spending is about the same as our population share and about the same as the number of equalized students, 35%. And so this to me was one of the, oh, I didn't realize that statements that, geez, that's interesting. Basically what you find is that the spending per pupil in Northwest Vermont is just about identical, within $350 of spending per pupil in the rest of Vermont. If someone had asked me the question of, who spends more on average per student, Northwestern Vermont students or students outside of Northwestern Vermont, I would have said that the spending per pupil in Northwestern Vermont is going to be a lot more than in other areas for a whole bunch of reasons, but it's not. It's almost the same thing. So basically, the poorer, remember the area outside of Northwestern Vermont is lower income, lower wages than Northwestern Vermont. But despite that, they spend the same amount per pupil as up here in the more wealthy and the more growing part of the state. And to me, that was just very interesting. So that's the kind of the guts of the basic report as we originally envisioned it. And now I'm going to talk a little bit, just for a few minutes, about the COVID recession and Northwest Vermont and the rest of the state. The first one I'm not going to talk too much on. Unemployment rates are roughly the same, a little bit higher during the recession, the early months of the recession, but the unemployment rate is a really misleading and an economic indicator. It really doesn't tell us much. And if you looked at that graph, you didn't know anything else. And I told you that the unemployment rate in Vermont today was just about the same as it was in December of 2019, January of 2020. And therefore the economy really hasn't changed much since then. You'd laughed me out of the room. The unemployment rate is not a good indicator of what's going on. Labor force changes are kind of interesting based on these numbers. And I think the quality of these numbers is pretty poor because of the recession. Our system of measurement was not set up to deal with a situation like this for a number of reasons. But according to the official numbers, Northwestern Vermont fared a lot worse than the rest of the state in terms of what happened to the labor force. Our labor force declined a lot in the summer of 2020. The labor force outside of Northwestern Vermont, for some bizarre reason, increased in the very early months of the recession and then declined, but not that much. And so the labor force decline in Northwestern Vermont is still worse than it is outside of the state, a situation where you would think just the opposite would have occurred given the kind of level of economic activity. However, I don't like either of those graphs, so I threw them in there because they're in the report. I just don't think they tell us very much. I think this tells us a lot more. So what I did here is I said, well, let's look pre-COVID, pre-recession. what was the structure of the economy like measured by employment in Northwestern Vermont versus the rest of the state? So to take government, for example. So in Northwest Vermont, the dark bar, about 18% of total employment in Northwest Vermont was in government. And that includes obviously state government, but it also includes local government. It includes teachers, people work in schools. It includes UVM and the state colleges. Those are all officially part of the government. And so the government share of the workforce, I'm sorry, of all the jobs in the state are pretty close in both areas. And that's a large part of that is probably because of the Montpelier and Waterbury, where lots of the state workers are, but they're pretty close. Healthcare, kind of interesting. It turns out that outside of Northwest Vermont, a larger percent of workers work in healthcare. It's about 18% outside of Northwest Vermont and maybe 16% within the area. The two I want to focus on, though, are number one, the next one, professional and business services. About 12 or 13% of all the jobs in Northwestern Vermont are in professional and business services, lawyers, accountants, veterinarians, engineers, those kind of services, of jobs, of companies. Whereas outside of Northwestern Vermont, it's only about 8%. And that's because these kinds of jobs tend to be located in cities. So New York City, for example, has a huge share of professional and business service jobs, much larger than the rest of New York State and probably much larger than the US as a whole. So those jobs tend to be located most likely in the Burlington area. The other one that I think is interesting, I'm not going to go through all of them here, just the other one that's interesting, is leisure and hospitality. So that's restaurants, bars, hotels. And in Northwest Vermont, that's about 10% of all the jobs. But outside of Northwest Vermont, it's about 13%. And that's, I think, because of the ski areas. They employ lots of people, and not just ski areas, but the tourism economy in general. We have a summer tourism economy as well as skiing, but that's a more important sector outside of Northwest Vermont than it is inside Northwest Vermont. And pretty much the other ones are fairly close together in terms of the structures. There's not a great deal of difference. The two big ones are professional services and leisure and hospitality. So if we think about the recession, I asked the question, so what happened? Where did the job losses occur in the recession? So what I did here is I compared the second quarter of 2020. So that's the months of April, May, and June. That was the worst of the recession. The recession, things kind of shut down, which I think earlier you said that March 16th or something is when you all went remote. And that's pretty much what happened. The state economy kind of didn't grind to a halt, but it ground to a lot slower level of activity in March, mid-March, end of March. But the March numbers for employment are based on employer payrolls the second week of March. So even though the economy started feeling the effects of COVID in great detail at the end of March, it didn't really show up until the April numbers. So the second quarter of 2020 is April, May, and June, the worst 3 months of the recession. And I compared that to the same 3 months in 2019. So you can see that in terms of the total job loss, the rest of Vermont experienced somewhat of a larger job loss than Northwest Vermont. It's not huge, just a percentage point or two. The rest of Vermont experienced a larger government job loss than Northwest Vermont. But let's go to those two sectors I outlined before, professional and business services. It turns out that Northwestern Vermont had a slightly smaller decline in that sector, and that's a high-paying sector than the state as a whole. Not a big one, not a big difference, but still it didn't affect them as much. But look at leisure and hospitality. So leisure and hospitality is the one sector of the economy that really got nailed during the recession. So in Northwestern Vermont, about 53, 54% decline in employment from the second quarter of 2019 to the second quarter of 2020. Outside of Northwestern Vermont, it was closer to 60% employment loss over that period of time. So remember, leisure and hospitality is a much larger sector outside of Northwest Vermont, and it experienced more job loss percentage-wise than Northwest Vermont, which is one reason why why this area outside of Northwest Vermont experienced a larger job loss. So so that's I think a very important thing to look at. So that's kind of the two parts of the study. I'm going to, if I can figure out how to stop the sharing, there we are. And I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has on these issues or the report.
I'll open the floor for general questions. Must have been very clear, Art. Go ahead, Carl, you're on mute.
Thank you. Art, thank you very much for that presentation. Going back to the equalized per student cost, it would seem to me one other thing you could gather from that slide is that Act 60 to some extent accomplished its objective, even though I was never a proponent of Act 60, but I'm just looking at it. Is that the way I should read that slide?
Actually, in my notes, I have that almost exact quote. I didn't use it when I was giving my talk, but I have mentioned that when I've given this talk sometimes, that yeah, to me, it's a sign that the proponents of Act 60 wanted per pupil spending not to be a function of wealth. And it seems like that it's been a success in that regard. Now, obviously, this is just an average, over the whole state, and things are different in different districts. But just looking at those two regions, yeah, I would say that was what the people who supported Act 60 would have liked to have seen.
Ironically enough, what I hear a lot about in Montpelier right now, there's still people very upset with how their school district is treated. But if I look at those statistics, it looks like it really did accomplish taking money from some segments and putting it to other segments in Vermont to equalize the per pupil spending, which must have been one of the major objectives.
Yeah, as I said, I have that written in my notes, and I think that's a fair assessment.
Thank you. Tim Smith?
Thanks, Kirk. Art, just a quick question. Will you be able to share your slides with Catherine and I so we can distribute them?
I think I sent them to Catherine a few days ago. Catherine, didn't
Okay.
I?
And
You could have, I've been out and haven't been.
Okay, well, anyway, Tim, the answer is yes, I'd be glad to. And Catherine, if you can't find it in your email, I'm pretty sure I did send it, but if not, let me know and I'll send you the deck.
okay, thank you.
Liz Gamache has posted a question in the chat. Is there data about how the nonprofit sector fared in terms of employment? Is this grouped in with government?
No, it's not grouped in with government. There is no official, these sectors were established by the US government when they first started putting all these indicators together, which was in the 1930s. And there is no official nonprofit sector. I know people have attempted to put them together and trying to piece it together from information we have, but it's not an official sector of the economy. So using the numbers that we get from the Vermont Department of Labor, you can't do that. And depending on, actually, I shouldn't say it. I'm not quite sure where lots of the nonprofits would be. Some of them might be in a category called healthcare and social assistance. Some might be in professional services. they're kind of scattered all over the place, and you'd kind of have to dig very deeply into the data to try to figure out where some of them are. But some of the firms in those categories would be included with other firms that really were not nonprofits. So it's very difficult. These are, by the way, any kind of establishment. So it can be government, it can be a for-profit company, it can be a nonprofit. The only thing that puts an establishment into this database is if you have paid employees, you are part of these numbers. So a nonprofit that has 3 employees and pays them a weekly wage, they are in this database. As to what sector of the economy they're in, I'm not sure. I know they're not in government.
Thank you. And Carl Rosenquist, did you have another question?
Yes, thank you. If you don't mind, it was just, again, you probably said this in the very beginning, but what was the rationale for grouping these 3 areas together, Grand Isle and Franklin County and Chittenden County? Just because you needed some size of aggregate population, or was there some other rationale for it?
Well, I think what I don't want to speak for Frank, but I think what his goal was to kind of get beyond looking at each county individually and try to see the whole northwestern region as an economic entity unto itself, and see what its role was in the economy. And so, I think that looking at Franklin and Chittenden County was pretty obvious that they're very closely interconnected. Transportation is very easy between them with the interstate, at least on the western side of the county. And Grand Isle County, because it's there. Grand Isle County is very small. It only has 6,000 people, right? It's a very small county, but it is in northwestern Vermont, so it's it is part of this region. The question really, and we didn't talk too much about this when we started talking about this project, do you want to include more counties? Well, then you have to say, well, if you're going to include Addison County, is that really fair? Because Addison County, it goes pretty far south, and you want to put in Lamoille County. Well, maybe some parts of it would be useful, but you can't just take parts. So, obviously, whenever you make these kind of decisions, there's limitations.
Thank you, Art.
Yep.
Thank you. And Andy Crossman from FCIDC had posted a question: how does Vermont compare to more advanced economies for professional services?
I don't know. And I would not call them more advanced economies. I think that's a bit, nothing personal. I don't like that terminology. I think we are advanced. Vermont is an average state in a lot of ways. Our incomes are about at the national average. That chart I showed you with where do people work, percentage of workers in different sectors. If I put the U.S. on there, you'd have a hard time telling Vermont from the U.S. For example, one of my favorite little vignettes or stories is most people would probably agree with the statement that Vermont has employment problems and maybe income problems because we need more of a manufacturing base. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I will tell you that the share of Vermont workers that work in manufacturing is identical to the US. It's about 10% in Vermont, about 10% in the US.
Thank you. And Kathy Lavoie, you had a question or a comment?
Yes. First, Art, is there anything that you expected to see that you didn't see?
Well, I guess I expected to see higher wages and a higher share of income. I didn't expect the education spending numbers to look the way they did. That was probably the biggest thing that affected me, or not affected me, but that was a surprise to me of any of these things. I guess the personal income tax numbers didn't really surprise me. The sales tax numbers, once I did that adjustment for for, where we don't know where they came from. I was surprised that it was as big as it was. So those were some of them. I was surprised in the COVID part that the numbers were for most sectors and for the total were so similar in terms of the job losses that it wasn't that the rest of Vermont wasn't hit harder in terms of job losses than Northwestern Vermont. So that was somewhat of a surprise to me as well.
And then the second thing is that, we continually hear over many years and certainly more so during COVID that the unemployment numbers just don't, they don't mean much. And I know that some of that is due to the definition of unemployment difference between federal and state definitions. But those numbers are as critical as any other numbers, and we're continually looking at numbers that don't mean anything. So my question is, do you know whether or not here in the state we're looking, or if anybody is working with those numbers, and as far as what we collect for data and how we collect it and so on and so forth?
Well, first of all, the state definition of unemployment is identical to the federal. All 50 states use the same exact methodology and definitions. In fact, the federal government basically pays for the State Department of Labor in terms of their data collection. And so there's a uniformity of definitions. And so most of the time, the unemployment numbers make some sense, but they don't in COVID, simply because of the type of unemployment we've had. Also because it used to be that you had to be looking for work to be officially categorized as unemployed. Now you don't. And that actually has changed, is different, I think, in different states now, but that's the first time that's happened. But there are people who know a lot more about these numbers than I do. Matt Barowitz at Department of Labor is really good on this. Joyce Manchester at the Joint Fiscal Office has written some policy briefs that are on the Joint Fiscal Office's website about unemployment that are very good. But the unemployment rate, I used to see it as just one piece of the puzzle to try to figure out what the economy is doing. And, I looked at it and I, implicitly weighted it as having a certain amount of importance, but I looked at a lot of other things, the number of jobs and state tax revenues and things like that. But the unemployment rate now is I almost totally discount it as any kind of measure of what's going on. To me, a much better number, which is actually issued weekly, which is unusual, is the number of people on unemployment insurance that are getting a check from the state, and also the number of people that are applying for unemployment insurance. Those to me are much better indicators, and as I said, weekly indicators of what's going on. And those, we don't have those regionally, but we have them for the state. And those give me pause, because the number of people getting a check, unemployment check, really hasn't budged for the last 6 months. And given that the economy is recovering slowly, but it's recovering, that really bothers me, because I would think that those numbers should be coming down, and they're not. And like I said, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, 2 months, you can say, well, let's wait for a pattern. But when something hasn't moved for 6 or 7 months, something's going on, and that to me is very disheartening.
Thank you. I'm going to take a couple of more questions from commissioners if they exist, and then we'll need to move on with other business of the commission for this evening. Bill Irwin.
Yeah, thanks, Kirk. First, I wanted to thank you and Art and Frank for putting this together, and for you, Art, sharing it tonight. It's really quite important for us to read and see. I wanted to ask, we get grants by often regional planning commissions or regions, and we manage here through a regional planning commission. How much do you think Chittenden County skews your data on the basis of these facts and figures we've seen here, since we do here in this Regional Planning Commission focus on Franklin and Grand Isle counties.
Mhm. Well, obviously, Chittenden County dominates the region, right? 220,000 people in the region, 165,000 are in Chittenden County, 49,000 in Franklin County. So Chittenden County dominates. And when Frank does release the formal report, there is a table at the very end that itemizes almost all these numbers that I'm using, and does break it out for Chittenden County alone to kind of address your issue is how much of this is really just Chittenden County. But again, Frank wanted to kind of look more at a regional, because you put a line on a map and call it a county line or whatever, and fundamental economic behavior doesn't really, there's nothing about an artificial line somebody drew on a map several hundred years ago that should make much difference in terms of how economies behave. And that's why you wanted to look at this region. Now there are times when a line on a map does matter. That line north of Franklin County does matter, right? I mean, there's another country up there. Right now it matters a lot because you can't even cross it. But even when you can cross it, there's a fundamental difference there. There's a fundamental difference of that line that the Soviet Union drew between East Germany and West Germany, and East Berlin and West Berlin, right? That there's some big differences there. There's a big difference in that line in North and South Korea. But Franklin County and Chittenden County, not so big. So that was the kind of the whole point, is to think of it more as a region, even though obviously one county does dominate. But trying to think a little bit more broadly than just all 14 counties of Vermont are separate, and they're not.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I've got one more question that was posted here, recognizing that your data went through 2019, but because the census for 2020 hasn't been released. But the question is, did you see any increase in population based on COVID? I hear realtors tell me that they are seeing strong sales and new people and remote workers living and moving to Vermont.
Yeah, there's no data on that at all. If you look at ask the DMV, have there been more people registering cars in Vermont? The answer is no. Are there more kids in Vermont schools? You would think if people move up here, they're going to put their kids in schools. There are some anecdotal stories in the media about that in a few school districts. The population numbers, even the 2020 population numbers won't show that. Remember, the 2020 population was April. The housing numbers are kind of interesting. And so what do the housing numbers show? Well, there has been an increase in housing prices in Vermont and housing sales, but most of that, there's significant increases in vacation home sales and vacation home prices. Residential home sales are up, but not as much as vacation homes. And prices are up, but only about as much as they are nationally. So, and we get that, those are numbers from the Vermont Tax Department. So those are pretty hard numbers. And I will just point out that, so if take someone who's moved up here from New York or Boston or somewhere out of the state, and they've moved here permanently, and they buy a house. If that is true, they are going to, when they pay their property transfer tax, I don't know if there's any realtors out there, but when they pay their property transfer tax, they're going to check the box that says this is a residential house. It's not a vacation home. And the tax rate on a residential property is lower than it is on a vacation property. So there's no reason somebody would move up here and buy a house planning to live up here and say they're buying a vacation home. But like I said, there has not been a significant increase in residential property sales. There's been a big increase in vacation sales. Probably a lot of that is, well, first of all, a lot of the housing sales is just record low interest rates, 3%. But if you were wanting to escape your living situation in a big city and you wanted to move to Vermont, you'd buy a vacation home. bring your family up, put your kids in school or homeschool them, do whatever you want to do. But that would show up in vacation homes. And so the question is, if you buy a vacation home, that probably doesn't mean you're planning to stay here. It probably means you're just going to stay up here for a while until you think it's okay to go back to your big city condo on the 23rd floor of a building where you can only have one person in the elevator at a time, and it's a real hassle to go up or down. So to me, the only numbers we have on this are housing sales and housing prices. We don't have any other information other than stories. And to me, there's not enough there to tell me that there's any significant numbers of people that have moved here, especially moved here permanently as a result of COVID.
Thank you.
Kurt-
And I want to
Kurt-
thank, yes,
Can I ask one question?
sure. Last
Um,
question.
Thank you. Art, did any of the numbers tell you reasons why either people are not staying here or not coming into the state?
No, I mean, that's a subject for a whole nother discussion. But none of these, in fact, there really are, it's very, very hard to answer that question with any data that exists. I have a whole presentation I do on Vermont's population. So yeah, but there's nothing in here that would tell us the answer to that question.
Thank you. Art, again, I want to thank you for your presentation. I want to thank everyone for the interest in the topic. It certainly is an important topic for our region and the entire state. Catherine, I'll take at face value, and I'm sure that you and Frank and others will work out the proper release of this information that we struggled with at the beginning of the meeting. So I will close agenda item 5, presentation, Northwest Vermont Economic Study, and move on to commission reports.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the meeting now.
No problem. I expect to see
Okay.
several people leave, but you're all welcome to stay and listen if you'd like.
Okay.
Thanks, Art.
Finance and operations, Harold. Did Harold join? Catherine, can you take the lead on that one?
Sure. The budget report and the balance sheet are both in your packet. Those of you who've already had the opportunity to look at it will notice that we are showing quite a significant deficit as of the end of the month. And that is, again, as a reminder, always because we do most of our contracts and grants on a quarterly billing cycle. So that should correct itself eventually once we do all of our end of the quarter invoices. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments on the report? No actions needed here, correct, Catherine?
Correct.
Hearing none. Personnel, Lori? I don't think Lori joined.
Lynn noted that she was having internet trouble. She was trying to join. So I don't think she made it.
Okay. And again, the staff reports are in the packet that was sent to you, but the Personnel Committee has advertised for a planning, technical and zoning administrator related to intermunicipal service agreement on the board's agenda tonight.
Correct. And we did interview, and a top candidate has accepted the position. So we are ready to go.
Great. Are you ready to announce names?
Yes, actually, we are ready to announce names. His name is Michael Johnson, and you might remember him because he introduced himself at what was going to be his last board meeting when he was leaving us as an intern, and he has applied for the position, and we have hired him, so he'll be staying.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good timing, because Highgate lost their zoning administrator.
Yes, we know, but now you're going to have one.
Thank you.
Maybe if you approve that agenda item.
Executive Committee, we did meet and reviewed the intermunicipal services agreement for zoning administrators. So that is a further agenda item. We also reviewed a Brownfields revolving loan fund grant and loan request. And I think there may be some modification to that. We will be meeting again tonight after this meeting concludes to address that issue. Project review is Alicia on.
Kirk, I didn't see her. This is
Could-
Bill Irwin.
Could
I
you
can-
take the lead on that, Bill, please?
Yeah, no problem. So in your packet, it's page 10 of 22. There are 3 projects listed there. The first 2 I'll review are require no board action. First, it's a section 248, 100 kilowatt net metered wind farm at 1272 Menard Road in Fairfield. And we're seeking additional information about that. We have additional time to make some decisions about it, and we'll do that at our next meeting in April. The other is the section 248 for BCAF GLC solar, a larger 500 kilowatt net metered solar, Bellevue Carriage Road in St. Albans. And we found that this was not of substantial regional impact and that it was in conformance with the regional plan. Excuse me. The third in your packet is the first listed there on page 10 of 22, and that's the PBM Nutritionals, Perigo Nutritionals application for 147 Industrial Park Road in Georgia, an Act 250 permit. This is a substantial development there in Georgia. Many of you may have heard us talk about it at past meetings. We've got to the point of voting here relative to the complete package as it moves on through the Act 250 process. We identified that this does have a substantial regional impact, almost entirely favorable in our opinion. It brings new work, brings, especially during construction, new jobs, and it takes a current employer and makes them about double in size of their productivity. And obviously one would think that it's important to Georgia as a municipality as well as the region. We did, however, also find that it was in conformance with the regional plan. So we hope that the motion for approving this project by the board would be met favorably, but we do need that action.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? If not, we could take a motion to ratify the decision by the project review committee to find that PBM Nutritionals, Perigo Nutritionals project conforms to the regional plan.
I'll make that motion.
Got a motion, a
Elizabeth,
second?
sorry.
Can I get a second?
This is Laz, I'll second.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion, questions? If not, I'll approve with signify by aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Bill, there also was a project review of Don Victor's community farm event barn on page 9. Is anything that needs to be brought to our attention there?
Yes, thanks for pointing that out. So this is a sort of development that many of you have probably noticed occurring over the last 5 to 10 years. This was of interest to us specifically because of COVID-19 and the fact that they would serve food there. We had some questions about it. We have great service by the NRPC staff, specifically Emily Cloft. She went to the Department of Health and verified with the food and lodging program that our concerns about any kind of cleanliness and housekeeping and whatnot would be tended to by the state inspection program, and also that the applicant would have to have an approved permit for doing that sort of thing if they were to have food on the premises, but they're generally going to be doing so by a vendor. So we did not find that there was any substantial regional impact. We also did find that it was, however, a project that might not be 100% in. I'm not sure why this says no here. That's interesting. I can't remember why there was any reason to say it was not in conformance with the regional plan. Does anyone from the committee remember, or is that a typographical error?
I think that's an error, Bill. Or that, or we didn't make a statement yet, but
Yeah, it
I think we
seems,
said it conform.
yeah, it would either be in conformance, and so that should be marked yes, or this should not be up for board action at this point in time, because we have not had clarification. But I think because this came from February, this may be a typographical error.
So I would ask that for the record, we not decide here if conformance with the regional plan should be yes or no until it comes back from the project review committee.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I just took a minute to check the minutes, and it does say that, Bob, you made a motion to find that the project was in conformance with the regional plan and does not have a substantial regional impact, and that motion carried.
Okay.
So I believe that that's a typo.
So I would switch it from no to yes then. Thank you.
Yeah, and given that change, that it is in conformance with the regional plan, there would be no further board action on this. And that has in fact gone from our concerns at the Regional Planning Commission to the Public Service Department for the rest of the Act 250 actions that take place there. So no action necessary here.
Great, thank you.
Well,
Anything else under project review?
no, just thanks to all the committee members. They've been doing a lot of great work.
Thank you, Bill. Transportation Advisory Committee, Harold is not here. It says here that the committee did meet in March, review potential projects will be considered under VTran's new project selection and prioritization process. I assume that they'll come back to us with an official report and any actions that are needed in a future meeting. Energy Committee didn't meet. Anything you need to bring to our attention, Bob?
No, nothing comes to mind unless Catherine has something as a result of the state doing things.
I will just let everybody know that the state is beginning its process of updating the comprehensive energy plan. And so that will be happening over the summer, and we'll have more information as that rolls out.
Thank you. Brownfields Committee, Laz?
The Brownfields Committee did meet. There was a project in Morrisville that requested a grant amount of approximately, I think it was about $90,000. And the committee made a recommendation to the executive board to split it into equal amounts of a loan and grant, because our grant money is getting down low, and we didn't want to deplete it funding this project. We want to be able to have some grant money for our region. We know there are some projects coming up, but we made a recommendation to fund it as an equal split to the executive committee.
Thank you, Laz. And are we meeting on this project later on this evening?
We are.
Okay. Regional Plan Committee, Lynn?
Lynn just texted me. She's not feeling well, so she's dropped off, but I'll let folks know that we did have a great meeting where we talked about some housing statistics for the region, none of which answered Brian's question from earlier about number of people moving in. And then we started looking at the schedule for updating the regional plan, which will be due in 2023.
Thanks. And, interesting, Brian asked that question, and I've got several friends that are realtors, and they're telling me they can't, there's just no inventory. And as soon as it comes on the market, it's selling. So either there's a bunch of houses sitting empty as people who already live here move into new ones, or something's going on. When can we expect to see that indicators report?
We expect to review it for the last time at the Regional Planning Committee at their meeting in April or May, and then it'll be on the board agenda.
Great, thank you. Municipal Plan Review Committee, Rowena?
Yes, we did meet on the 22nd, and we did the second and final review of the Fairfield Town Plan Review, and we held a public meeting, and this will be an action item later tonight with our board recommendation.
Fantastic, thank you. Vermont Economic Progress Council, Al's not here. Do you know anything on this one?
Only what's in the report, that there were no projects of regional interest on the consideration.
Okay. GMT, Bob?
Yeah, GMT, we had some discussions about some service changes. They don't affect our area directly. And the other discussions we've been having quite a bit about is whether we should be fair fee across the whole system after we get through our COVID activities. So that process is continuing.
Clean Water Advisory Committee staff?
Or Bob.
Or Bob?
And actually, as I say that, we did have a service change in our area, Catherine, didn't we?
We did, but I didn't see it on the public meeting schedule, so I don't know if they dropped it.
Huh. That's a good question. Well, what they're talking about doing is changing our commuter route. Instead of being up Pearly Collins for the main parking lot, is changing it to the Park and Ride, which will shift the route around a little bit. But it will make some things easier and some things harder, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay.
In terms of Clean Water Advisory Committee, I'm going to have to look at the notes to see what it says. Oh, we reviewed the technical basin plans for Missisquoi Bay, which is why I didn't pay much attention, because I'm not in Missisquoi Bay.
Doesn't it all run together somewhere? And staff reports.
So Kirk, this is Bethany. I can just give a quick report. It was partially covered in the TAC report, but I've been busy working on the new, learning the new VTrans project selection and prioritization process, which we are undertaking and continuing in the April and May. And I'll just note for board members that this process has a real shift from prioritizing existing transportation projects that are in the capital program, and it's shifting to selecting and evaluating potential project ideas. And that's where the tax focus is going to be. So, and the full board will see the tax results either probably both in May and June. And just be warned, it's going to look a little different than years past, but it's exciting.
I'm hearing good potential things about Route 7 going through Georgia.
On the list.
Anything else you want to bring to our attention under staff reports?
I'll just note that staff's been really busy doing letters of support and grant applications. It's been a busy few weeks with Northern Border Regional Commission, USDA grants, Vermont Community Development Program grants, and writing letters of support for the potential new earmarks that Congress will be undertaking again. So we're trying to help and support our communities in those areas. And also in terms of legislative work, one thing I want to focus on everybody's attention is that the CUD is really ramping up its effort. The Communications Union District, Sean is here if he wants to add anything, but they're wrapping up their business plan analysis for how to potentially implement broadband in our unserved areas. And there's a bill in the legislature that would provide significant funding to the CUDs to help support that effort. And also municipalities could, as part of their federal relief funds, use some money to help to support the CUD and broadband infrastructure.
And at our last meeting, I think it was Yvonne had raised an issue with potential legislation. Can you give an update on that?
As far as the last I checked, but again, I've been out for a week, but before that, it hadn't moved through enough. The transportation bill that he was concerned about hadn't moved forward in the form that it was introduced.
Okay. Is there anything else anyone would like to ask or discuss under commission reports based on what you see in writing or other? Hearing none, I'll close the agenda item on commission reports. Thank you, everyone. Intermunicipal services zoning administrator. In your packet, there is a intermunicipal zoning administrator service agreement draft. Catherine will take us through that briefly, what this is about. I think there is still one area that we need to make sure is clear in the draft, and that is who's responsible for defending zoning regulations and actions of the zoning administrator that are consistent with the zoning regulations. But other than that, why don't I just open up the topic for you to discuss, Catherine, and help us understand what action you need this evening.
Sure. In terms of the action that we're hoping to get this evening, it would be for the board to approve the agreement pending final legal review. I did get some notes from the attorney. It looks like they're tweaking some of the language, but essentially it's as I presented it to you. Nothing fundamentally has changed. As a reminder, we changed our bylaws several years ago to allow for intermunicipal service agreements, which is a much simpler way that municipalities can work together to complete municipal services by hiring the Regional Planning Commission. This would be our first agreement under that provision of our bylaws. The towns of Highgate and Sheldon have decided they would like to join together with NRPC to hire us to provide the zoning administrator. As many of you know, in your communities, keeping a zoning administrator in place for a long period of time can be a challenge sometimes, given the hours and the demands of the position. So working together with the two communities, we really felt that this could be a way that we could support those efforts to keep the zoning administrator position a little more stable and professional and provide background support and training from our staff and our organization. This agreement, as it's laid out, ensures that the towns of Highgate and Sheldon pay the full cost of those zoning administrator services. So the NRPC and the other communities are in no way subsidizing the cost of the zoning administrator services. We're fortunate that we had some needs on a staffing level for some projects we have, that we were able to round out this into being a full-time position and make it a really attractive position for someone to apply for. The way it's set up right now, it's a one-year pilot with evaluation after 6 months. So we can work with Highgate and Sheldon and decide if this is working. And if so, go ahead and extend the agreement by mutual consent of all the parties in time for municipal budgeting, so that it can feed right into next year's municipal budgets. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
So Catherine, the concern that I raised, I believe, and I'll assume that can be covered under pending legal review.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just a quick one. How many days a week are they proposing to have the administrator in each town?
It's up to 16 hours a week in Highgate and up to 5 hours a week in Sheldon.
So there's room for another town to come in if wanted.
There's potentially room depending upon how many hours they need.
Okay.
Which
Yeah.
I guess, to piggyback on that question, and I'm not frozen, I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, sorry. I guess my concern is, because bylaws can be, the nuances can be very different. How many towns would you want one person effectively managing? is my concern with that.
Yeah, I agree with you in that question. I think 3 to 4, depending upon the communities, would be definitely the max. I think 3 would be kind of the sweet spot maximum. And anything more than that would be really challenging, not only from trying to learn and understand the different bylaws, but just managing your schedule and the competing demands of the communities.
Any other
So
questions?
I guess sort of related to that, because I guess I should have known about this idea, but there's been some talk about, and I don't know if this goes beyond the scope of what staff, um, you talked about staff training, but having like a fire marshal inspector kind of somebody that could be shared with the municipalities. Is that something that could be considered?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we looked at this many years ago, this idea, that was one, zoning administrator was one, health officers, another one that towns struggle with. I think there's a lot of professional positions that towns struggle with, where they, as an individual town, only need a few hours a week. And it's hard to keep someone professional that's only going to work a few hours a week. So if we can combine them, we'll end up with better services for all involved.
And I think that there was a move for a little while coming out of Enosburg to see about combining municipalities for a fire marshal position. So that may come up in the near future again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
It just sounds at this point with 16 hours in Highgate and 5 hours in Sheldon, that there's a possibility that to get it so the employee has a good rounded salary, I guess you'd put it, they need another town.
Well, right now we have in the budget enough staffing, enough in our staffing budget, enough of our staffing needs to fill out the rest of the hours to create a full-time position with benefits. So right now we are able to do that even without a third town.
Okay.
Catherine, I would anticipate Enosburg to call you
Okay.
regarding this zoning position.
Thanks for the heads up, Sean.
Does anyone have any comments or errors or items they want to bring up in regards to the agreement itself?
Do we need any motion, Kurt, to
We will need a motion at some point to approve of the intermunicipal zoning administrator service agreement pending final attorney review.
Would you like me to make that motion?
I'd be fine with you making that motion.
Okay, Elizabeth makes that motion.
I'll
second.
Well, I'll second it.
We got a motion and a second. And I'm assuming that you're okay that includes the attorney also looking at making sure that the appropriate person is responsible for errors within the zoning regulations themselves. Am I okay with that, Elizabeth?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
I'll note that you're first. It's the first one of a kind and it's in the state. So
It's going to be an interesting pilot, and
sure is.
I think that there's a lot of places, water districts, a lot of places, things like this could be applied. Hopefully this one is successful and leads the way for more in the future. Next item on our agenda is the Town of Fairfield Town Plan. It is an action item. We're going to need regional approval of that town plan, as well as confirmation of the planning process and determination of energy compliance. There is a recommendation enclosed. Rowena, could you take us through that, please?
Sure. We had the town meeting. We had a public meeting on it, took comments on it. That was on the 22nd, and we have then the findings and the history on the last 2 pages of the packet. And we had done an original initial review and had given comments back, and then this was the final review. And they had done a wonderful job, and we did have a few people from the public that did attend the open meeting. And we have decided that we would recommend approval on all points. And so then quickly, I have three recommendations that we'll need to vote on. And the first recommendation, of course, is the regional approval of the municipal plan. And the Plan Review Committee held a public hearing on March 22nd at 5:30 p.m. to hear public comments on whether the Fairfield Municipal Plan should receive regional approval. After deliberation, the Plan Review Committee hereby recommends to the Board of the Regional Commissioners that the Fairfield Municipal Plan as submitted and reviewed receive regional approval in accordance with state statute. And at this time, I'm looking for a motion to regionally approve the Fairfield Municipal Plan.
This is
make
Bill
that
Irwin. I
motion.
would make that motion.
Got a motion from Bill. Do I hear a second?
Brian Doobie, second.
Thank you, Brian. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you.
And then the second recommendation that we had was the confirmation of the planning program. And after a public hearing and deliberation, the Plan Review Committee hereby recommends to the Board of Regional Commissioners that Fairfield's planning process be confirmed in accordance with state statute. And we're looking for a motion to confirm the Fairfield's planning process.
I'll move that
Colleen, so
motion.
moved.
I've got a motion from Colleen, a second from
I'll second that. Richard.
Richard. Any discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries.
Okay. And then finally was the determination of energy compliance. The Plan Review Committee held a public hearing on March 22nd at 5:30 p.m. to hear comments on whether the Fairfield Municipal Plan meets the requirements for a municipal enhanced energy plan in 24 VSA 4352. After deliberation, the Plan Review Committee hereby recommends to the Board of Regional Commissioners that the Fairfield Municipal Plan, as submitted and reviewed, receive an affirmative determination of energy compliance in accordance with state statute. And we're looking for a motion to find that the Fairfield Municipal Plan meets the standards for an affirmative determination of energy compliance and is in conformance with the Northwest Regional Plan.
Brian Doobie, like to make that motion.
Thank you, Brian. Can I get a second?
I'll make the second.
Colleen, second.
We've got a second from Richard. Any other discussion? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you, Rowena, and the rest of the Municipal Plan Review Committee. It's important that we review these and help towns get their plans approved and follow planning processes. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Next item on the agenda is commissioner announcements. Does anyone have anything they'd like to bring up during commissioner announcements?
I do, Kurt, if no one else does.
You've got the floor, Yvonne.
Thank you. Yvonne from Franklin. Here we are again at this time of year, and I know I brought this situation up from last year. Green Up Day is coming up, and I know that we've been hit pretty hard, especially 2 years ago with used tires. Do you know if
Mhm.
we're going to have any helping hand taking care of the tires if we get an infestation of them again?
Has anyone heard anything?
I haven't. I'm wondering if any of our board members who are also solid waste district members know the answer to that question.
Well, I think that I'm trying to remember, solid waste district did put some money in its budget, the same as it did last year. So Yvonne, I don't remember the details of that. So there'll be some help, but it's obviously not going to be enough to cover everything. All right.
Right. I just didn't know if there was still something there like there was last year.
Yeah, I was trying to find it in my notes. I'm pretty sure we put it in the budget of the same amount to have a little bit available for each town. Last year, not each town took advantage, so there may be a little extra money for those of you that need more than are being used by the others.
Fair enough. I mean, we can discuss it again next month and see what we come up with.
Okay. Catherine, or can you just make sure we note
Yeah,
that?
note.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else under commissioner announcements?
I don't really have an announcement, but I just wanted to thank you, Kirk, for the way you conduct the meetings. I just appreciate, I've been in some meetings, I've led meetings, so I know it's not always easy, particularly on Zoom. So I just wanted to say thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for the compliment.
I'll second that.
Anyone else?
I'll third it. Good job.
Okay, enough.
Yeah, you're turning a little red there, Kirk.
That's my ski burn.
Yeah. I will make a motion to adjourn if nobody has any other announcements.
I've got a motion. Second.
I'll second it.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Bye.
And